to come in and people may be joining. Also, it's not quite a minute, but I have 11:15, so we should get going. Welcome to Mavens of Mayhem, the Upper Hudson chapter of Sisters in Crime. I'm very excited to have as our speaker today, Rebecca Rigo Barry. She's a collector of historical and rare books and documents. She's worked for a long time as the editor of Fine Books and Collections, but she's currently the director of communications at the RAB Collection. If that's a company that buys and sells historical documents. And she's the author of numerous articles. Her first book is Rare Books Uncovered, published in 2015. But today we'll hear her talk about her book, The Vanishing of Carolyn Wells. Rebecca is an extraordinary literary detective, as you'll see from her talk and the book, as well as a biographer and scholar. Even though I specialized in 19th and early 20th century literature, I learned not just so much about the fascinating Wells, but also about the literary and cultural productions of the time in which Wells participated and which Rebecca's going to elucidate as she discusses Wells and as she talks about who gets remembered. And I'm really, really excited to welcome and hear Rebecca's talk. And I'll let Rebecca take over.
Great. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And, it's funny, whenever I start a talk or presentation on Carolyn, I always ask, had anyone ever heard of her before? The book or this presentation, and I'll get one hand, one hand out of an audience. And I wonder if this group is a little different because, Carolyn was a mystery author, but I wouldn't be surprised. I actually did a talk in correlation to an exhibit that was called Who Done It? Key Books in Detective Fiction. And, I think there were 100 books or something, 100 different authors represented, and she was not one of them. So she was just a figure who was just lost after being extremely popular. So that's that question, who gets remembered, that question, who was Carolyn Wells and why don't I know her? Those are the driving forces of my project. So I'm going to just share my screen so we can look at some slides. Okay, hopefully that works. Great. And that's just a picture of Carolyn. I think you can all see it, right? I think so. Sort of midlife and kind of when she started calling herself the Dean of American mystery writing. So that's probably that's the photo that really sums up who she is in that moment. And I'm going to start with, who was she? Okay, she was many, many things. She was a librarian. She was a poet. She was a humorist. She was a magazine editor, a writer of children's and young adult fiction, a puzzle master, an anthologist, the first editor of the Best American Mystery Stories series, and finally, a mystery novelist. In all, she wrote about 180 books over her lifetime in the late 19th, early 20th century, into the mid 20th century, actually. Some became bestsellers. Some were made into silent films, especially with Thomas Edison. She wrote for magazines big and small. I mean, everything from Saturday Evening Post and Harper's to, extremely little literary magazines, which we'll see a couple of examples of. She was acquainted with 4 presidents. And she was so popular during her time that Milton Bradley actually licensed her name to make a game, which we'll also see later in the presentation. It's kind of when I saw the game at a library one day that I was really taken aback, and I thought, okay, this is a woman who was so popular, and it's just unbelievable that as an English major and an inveterate reader and, somebody who loves the 19th century, that I didn't know her name at all. It was just shocking. So I'm going to just start with how I got to know her, which is through this book plate, strangely enough. as Ellen said, for a very long time, I was the editor of a magazine called Fine Books and Collections. And so every year I would go to these antiquarian and rare book fairs, particularly in New York, Boston. And my husband would sort of tag along with me sometimes. And one year at the New York Book Fair, he bought me an old copy of Walden, Henry David Thoreau's Walden, which is like one of my favorite books in American literature. And he gave it to me as a birthday present. And inside this book is a bookplate of Carolyn Wells. This bookplate that you're seeing on your screen right now, in which, that's actually her face. This was designed for her. And she's in this sort of Renaissance garb, and she's holding in her hands that little creature that's called the Lincoln Imp. He's actually a little sort of piece of statuary from Lincoln Cathedral in England, and her name there at the bottom. And this is in 2011, so at the time, this bookplate, this name, it means nothing to me. I was surprised to see a woman collector have her own bookplate. There weren't that many women book collectors in the early 20th century, just not having enough money or agency of their own to do that. So it kind of stuck with me, but again, I didn't know the name, wasn't really surprised. So I was more bowled over by Walden and Henry David Thoreau. Anyway, it goes on my shelf, and I don't think too much more about it um, until about 2018, 2019. Well, I should say that I do see her name, Carolyn Wells, on some mystery novels from the 20s and 30s as I'm going to all these different book fairs. Again, I'm not really putting it together. I mean, I guess the name Wells is not unusual enough that it really gave me pause. But then I hear in 2018, 2019 that this British publisher is going to reissue a book called Murder in the Bookshop. And it's by someone named Carolyn Wells. And that is probably the moment where I really put it together. Oh, Carolyn Wells. Could it be the same Carolyn Wells who was a book collector? And finally, I finally figured this all out, and I think to myself, okay, here's a woman. She was a book collector, early 20th century, and apparently she wrote a mystery called Murder in the Bookshop, which is all about the antiquarian book world and about, somebody trying to steal a signed book and getting, skewered to death in a bookshop in New York City, and completely up my alley. So I decided I'm going to write an article about this, and here. So, I'm just gonna do a little research on this woman about, how she parlays her interest in rare books into a book that actually becomes a New York Times bestseller in 1936. And I think it's just going to be this little one-off article, and I write it for Crime Reads. You probably can't see there at the bottom this very fine print, but the article came out on March 19th, 2020. It's kind of in the middle of the worst time ever. So, but however, that aside, while I'm researching this article, I was looking for a scholar that I could talk to, just interview about her. And I could only find really one scholar who had done any kind of work on her. I mean, I've since found two or three others, but at the time, just, as a journalist, just kind of looking for who could I find who could just tell me something a little bit about Carolyn Wells. I found this woman named Professor Margaret Stetz at the University of Delaware, and she had written two scholarly articles about Carolyn Wells, but not at all about her mystery writing, more about her poetry and humor writing. And interviewing her and she's telling me, oh, but Carolyn was very famous as a humorist. That's where her talent lies. And she was writing for all these magazines, and she was a very funny poet and very witty, and called one of the most funny women in America. And I thought, are we talking about the same person? And yes, we are talking about the same person. And at that point, I'm thinking to myself, okay, this woman is obviously a pretty famous collector. She's got her own book plate. She's collecting really high-end material. She's also a best-selling mystery novelist. Now you're telling me she's a humorist and a poet, and she's written for all these magazines. And, aside from thinking again, how do I not know this person? I'm thinking, wow, there's all these great strands here. There's all these different avenues that, if I'm going to research this person, there's just so many ways I could go about it. There's so much good material here. And, so I just start kind of Googling around, which finding that there's very little written about her, and what is out there is incorrect. Number of books. Well, some people said she wrote 100 books or 150 books. The bibliographies out there were incomplete. Her birth date was always kind of wrong in certain places, which could be because she was lying a little bit toward the end. But you couldn't really never hammer down many details about her, and so I just thought it was just a prime subject that I could delve into. And because it was the beginning of COVID, uh, I could spend 6, 9 months just kind of digging around in different archives online and that kind of thing. So really, in that sense, the timing worked out well. And one of the first places I went looking for her is her hometown, which is Rahway, New Jersey. And I put this map up in case you guys aren't familiar. I'm from New Jersey, so Rahway was pretty familiar to me. It's right across from, Staten Island. She was kind of midway between Philadelphia and New York. And that's her home in Rahway, which still stands. It's a big, beautiful house. It's actually only had two owners since the Wells family. So, after COVID, one of the things I did was, of course, go to Rahway and kind of stake out all the different places where she lived and worked and walked and went and that kind of thing. So she grew up in a very privileged upper middle class family. Dad's at work, mom's home. They had staff to do kind of the heavy lifting around the house. She was involved in, school. She was valedictorian of her class, very precocious student, amateur theatricals, church activities. That's kind of how she passed her time. And she did have several siblings, two of whom died pretty young. And when her younger sister died, they both had scarlet fever. And when her younger sister died, Carolyn was left with hearing loss in her left ear, which was a disability that she lived with for the rest of her life. And kind of, she was always going to doctors and trying to get cured of this, and it never worked. But that is something that throughout her life she kind of battled. Um, I have here some photos of this cute little book that she created when she was 6. And this is at the Ohio State University Library in Columbus. Uh, as you can see, it's called One Year at Our Boarding School by Carrie Wells. She was born, she was named Carrie. She later changed it to Carolyn. And this I love because it just reminds me of like what the Bronte sisters were doing kind of 30 or 40 years before. And the handwriting, I mean, look, the fact that she is 6 years old and she's writing like this is a story and it's all written out. It's to me incredible and really shows how precocious she was as a child and how literary. I mean, she talks a little bit in her autobiography about how she was really into games as a child, games and word games specifically, and you can really see that coming through here. But she also talks about that, she knew the alphabet by 15 months, and by the time she was 3, she was reading like any adult. And whether or not that's true, I don't know. But frankly, from looking at this book, I wouldn't be too surprised. She seems like she, from an early age, was kind of showing her brilliance. And these are some photos from the 1890s. So, which I just love. I just can't get over how beautiful these photos are. um, and so right here, she's about, I don't know if I mentioned when she was born. Sorry, she was born 1862. So by this time, by the time these photos are taken, she's about 30. And she's still living at home under her parents' roof, as you would have. And she has graduated high school. She's decided not to go to college, even though that is something that was offered to her, unusually so. But she did spend her time doing her own studies. She had a plan of study, and it was, English and German and botany and art and music. She spent 3 summers in Amherst, Massachusetts, doing like Shakespeare, with a famous Shakespearean. And actually, when she was there, one of the summers that she was staying in Amherst, she went and met Lavinia Dickinson. Emily Dickinson had already died, but Lavinia would bring in guests and have tea with them if she wanted to. And so on one of those occasions, she met Carolyn. So, but here she is, almost 30, not married, which is also pretty unusual. And I don't really know the reason for that. But I do know that she decides at this point that she should maybe have a job, although there aren't very many jobs that are available to a woman like her. She's kind of upper middle class. It's not okay for her to be making money necessarily unless the family really needs it. So she gets a job as a part-time librarian at the Rahway Public Library. And I think it's because her grandmother is on the board there. So it's kind of seen as a safe space for her. And she starts working, a couple days a week, and she writes about how she did nothing but read. So, which, of course, is not what librarians do today. But she talks about how she did nothing but read. She ordered books, she read them, and she got a great education doing that. And one of the other things that happens when she's working at the library is she's reading all of these sort of new magazines, the quote unquote little magazines that are coming out in the 1890s. And there must be some sort of spark that happens with these little magazines because she decides that she's going to start pitching them. She's going to start writing little bits of poetry and prose in the same vein that, they're publishing and send them to the editors and see what happens. And what happens is she starts, getting published. She starts seeing her byline in several different magazines. I think her very first byline appears in Vogue, and that's 1893, 1894. A little poem about fashion. I think it's about having pockets in dresses, which I love because we're still talking about having pockets in dresses. Um, but she's writing to just anyone who will publish her. So Puck is another one, which, if you're not familiar, Puck was a pretty famous humor magazine based out of the Puck building in New York City. And she's writing just bits of poetry and parody, satire, little short stories. She's also writing for a magazine called The Lark, which you see here on the screen. This was a really small magazine out of San Francisco, which was very literary and had this editor named Gillette Burgess. And what I find interesting about this is that, she pitches him and his first response to her is no women contributors. I've actually seen this letter and I just, love seeing this letter, but, no women contributors, thank you. And instead of, being angry about that, she decides to take it as a challenge and she starts just pitching him more stuff and sending him more things. And within a year, she's not only published in the magazine, she's on the masthead as one of the editors, and she and Gillette would go on to be lifelong collaborators and friends. So, perseverance, I guess, was one of her core things about Carolyn is that she would persevere and she was very stubborn, it seems. So anyway, she's getting published in these magazines. She's also getting published in the bigger magazines like Saturday Evening Post and Harper's and Life and Colony. Um, she goes from just being a real sort of literary nobody to somebody who's on the pages of virtually every magazine by the end of that decade. Another one is the Chapbook, which was a little magazine, literary, but had a pretty big circulation for that kind of magazine. They also had a publishing house related to it. And so she gets a piece published in the Chapbook in 1896. And by the end of that year, they've also published her very first book, which is here on the screen in the middle. It's called The Sign of the Sphinx. And it's basically a book of riddles. They call it charades, but it's not charades the way we play it. It's just basically a book of riddles. And this is it. I mean, this is the first book, 1896. She's in her mid 30s. And this is the book that kind of launches her, into the second career, although she is smart enough to keep her day job, for at least for a little while longer. Um, she also starts writing for children's books and children's magazines, especially St. Nicholas, which was edited by Mary Mapes Dodge, pretty, famous children's book author at the time. And what she's doing for St. Nicholas and also another magazine called Youth's Companion is the same kind of thing she's doing for these adult magazines, poetry and prose and puzzles. That's another big part of her life, are puzzles and puzzle making, which, since she was a child, she was interested in. And this bicycle puzzle here is an example. I mean, I kind of look at it and I actually don't even want to look at it. It's so confusing. But this is the kind of thing that really floated her boat. So, I'm going to say as an aside that I make this claim in the book about her that she was maybe the New York Times first crossword puzzle editor, which is definitely a debatable thing, but she was doing crossword puzzles for the New York Times they had a supplement called the Midweek Pictorial, and she was doing that in the 1920s when crossword puzzles were just, just entering the literary sphere, and people were kind of going crazy for crossword puzzles, and she was there, and she was creating them for that, New York Times published magazine. Even though the New York Times itself would not allow crossword puzzles on its pages until the 1940s. which is kind of hilarious because like I feel like the New York Times today is just virtually nothing but puzzles. But that's an aside. And just to say that she was very into puzzles and puzzle making, and I'm sure that, being mystery authors yourselves, uh, you'll see where that's going. She parlays her work for these children's magazines into some young adult novels. She writes about 32 different children's and young adult novels in that sort of first 10 or 12 years of the 20th century. Most famously are these Patty books. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of them. There were 17 of them. And it's basically a young girl who's, mother has died, so she's being raised by her father, and she's has to face all these sort of moral questions and how to live her life and how to be a good daughter, how to become a good wife and a good mother and those kinds of things. Very moral writing, and thus very well loved by parents and grandparents and librarians. And one of the really cool things that I found when researching the Patty books is all these great inscriptions in them. If you go online and you look at the Internet Archive or different university archives, if they've got a Patty book and you can flip through it and you can see it's like, to Sandy, love mama, Christmas 1930, and all kinds of great inscriptions like that. So they were definitely the kind of books that were um, given to young girls as a way of, here's a fun story, but it's also going to have a moral that we approve of. And because there were so many of them and they all would be published the same, they were definitely collectible. So very often girls would have whole sets of them. And, after writing and publishing my book, I thought I would hear a lot from people involved in the mystery world, but what I've heard the most from are people who loved the Patty books. Here's another selection of just book covers, just to show you the kinds of things that Carolyn was working on in that first decade or so of the 20th century. There were some years where she wrote or edited 8 different books for 8 different publishers. She kind of went from 0 to 60. She's writing poetry, she's editing anthologies for Scribner, she is writing young adult novels, she's writing an adult novel. The Matrimonial Bureau is one of her first adult novels, and it's co-written with a man, which I think is probably to help her get published. A children's book, an illustrated book. I mean, she's just kind of all over the place. And by the way, also still, keeping her library job at least until 1902, when she finally relinquishes that job and decides, I'm an author. This is what I should be doing with my life. So really beautiful covers too. You can see why some of these books are collectible, even if only for the covers. So she leaves the library in 1902. She's really wrapped up in all of this literary world stuff. Um, when I opened my book, I opened the book at Mark Twain's birthday party in 1905, where Carolyn Wells, kind of a literary nobody, even 5 years prior to that, is giving the keynote poem. So, she's really kind of exploded onto the scene. And it's also right around that time, 1905, 1906, that she begins writing short stories for magazines that have to do with crime, detection, mysteries. And she was very much influenced by Anna Catherine Green's work. And of course, she loved Sherlock Holmes. I mean, who didn't love Sherlock Holmes in the 1890s? So these are the two forces that are probably compelling her, hey, you're good at this and you love this. Why don't you put them together and start writing these stories? And so a couple of stories start being published, mysteries and detection stories. And then her very first full-length novel comes out in 1909. It's called The Clue. And, if you look at this frontispiece here, you can see this is the illustration that was at the beginning of the book. This woman in this yellow silk gown, she's dead. And, I think they tried to say, oh, is it suicide? Has she been killed? It's actually really, I don't know if anyone here has read it, but I really enjoyed it. And it was actually recently remade in a new audiobook version. So if you're looking to listen to an audio version of it, that's available. But the yellow dress is something we might come back to later because it's something that comes back to haunt her. But this is the first of 82 mysteries that Carolyn Wells will write. And one of the things I like to point out, because it's one of the things I love about her, is this book was published when she was 47 years old, which in her time period was literally ancient. And the fact that she now has 81 ahead of her is just, it's really, to me, it's heartwarming, it's surprising, it's just, again, one of the things I really love about her. These are some of her early mysteries. So they're published, 1910, 1915, that kind of that area. And if you are noticing some really masculine energy, that's to be, it's exactly right, because people were trying to publish books, make them look as if they were sort of Sherlock Holmes inspired, or maybe that, so that they weren't meant to look like they were too female or too domestic. They were meant to look masculine. And these, they worked well for her. She starts building a name for herself as a mystery author. I will say that here's one interesting quote to go back to that sort of male-female thing. From 1916, there was a critic in Los Angeles who wrote this: "Detective stories written by women do not, as a rule, promise much in the way of entertainment. They set at defiance every known law of reason and play havoc with the reader's credibility," which just boo, right? Um, he kind of turns it around and says, but Carolyn Wells is different. But that is something that in the earlier days, criticism very much focused on. How could a woman have written this? Well, I can't believe it. How would a woman come up with this kind of thing? Which I don't know. I don't know if that's surprising to you all, but it was surprising to me to read those kinds of reviews. Some of you may be familiar with this book, Technique of the Mystery Story, the first real history and how-to of the genre, which Carolyn writes. She's only written a handful of mysteries by this point, so I'm not quite sure. I think, this publishing house came to her and said, "Hey, would you like to write this book?" And whenever a publisher came to her and said, "Hey, would you like to write this book?" she never said no. So she said yes. And, she writes this book about, her philosophy on mystery writing and what her favorites were. And she interviews some famous mystery authors at the time. Um, one of her kind of famous quotes about this is, right here on the screen, that she meant mysteries just to entertain and amuse. She didn't feel like they had any deeper meaning. And also, she writes a lot about how she felt the core of a good mystery was the puzzle at its center. She wasn't very interested in the whole idea of like deep characterization or deep scene setting. To her, it was about the puzzle, about picking up the clues along the way and solving the puzzle. And even when that kind of mystery goes out of style, which it does, she doesn't quite keep up with that. She's doing what she loves and what her readers expect of her, and she's not, going outside of that box at all. A brief little slide here just to mention her film work, because I was really impressed by the film work, and it takes up a chapter of my book. Finding out that she wrote 16 different silent films, or some of them were based on her mystery stories or mystery novels that had been published, and some of them were just originals, what they called scenarios, which is really just kind of a plot summary that these directors and producers would then use to create a silent film. And again, half of them were done with Thomas Edison. So that was another kind of famous person that she met and was friendly with, him and his wife. So you can see his hand and seal. It's based on a Fleming Stone story. Fleming Stone was her #1 detective. He is in, let's see, I want to say 61 of her 82 mysteries. He's the detective. And he's kind of a scholarly fellow. I think Stone might be, it might be her way of saying he's kind of a boring fellow. He's the kind of detective who swoops in at really the 11th hour and just, all can just tie up everything at the end. So scholarly, brilliant. Um, and so one of them was several were made into silent films. His Hand and Seal was one of them. And the film poster for Deary I like to show because it's A, kind of beautiful, and B, I don't know if you can notice on your screen, but Carolyn Wells' name is there, and it's actually larger than the director's name on this poster, which again goes to show you that, in the late 20s, her name was, especially for readers, people in the know, a household name. Here are some of her middle period mysteries. That one there on the left, Vicky Van, 1918, that was made into a film. That was one of her bestsellers as well. And then, I'm just kind of showing what some of the great cover art looked like. It changed, it changed from that sort of more masculine stuff to this kind of Art Deco, a little bit more, I don't know, dramatic looking stuff. And here's a big change that happens in Carolyn's life in 1918. She gets married for the first time, and I think it's a surprise to her, it's a surprise to everyone, and moves out of her family's house. I mean, she's been living in her, with her mother in the family house for 55 years. But she gets married. She marries a man named Hadwin Houghton, and not of the I mean, he is related to the Houghton publishing family, but he's not in publishing, which is kind of something that needs to be corrected again and again. But he's a wealthy man, he's retired, and he moves her to this apartment in New York City called the Hotel des Artistes, which has just been built. And it's basically an apartment building for artists of all kinds, authors, film directors, visual artists. And she's very happy there. She comes to New York City, which she loves, and she knows it's the sort of the cultural heart, and she really becomes what I was saying before, the dean of American mystery writing. She joins all these different clubs, and she's very involved in the literary world and the theater world as well. Um, Her happiness with Hadwin doesn't last that long because he dies a little over a year into their marriage. But he leaves her a rather wealthy woman, living in this beautiful apartment in New York City. And he had money, she has money from all the books that she's writing. So, leaves her as a pretty wealthy woman. These are some of the mysteries she's writing around that time, the 20s and mid 30s. Uh, Murder in the Bookshop is a book I talked about at the beginning. This is 1936. This is probably her biggest bestseller. It was a New York Times bestseller that year. It's definitely my favorite book, but that probably has more to do with the subject matter than anything else. And it's probably one of the only books you can also find currently. I mean, if you were looking for used books, you can find many of her books. But if you're looking for a new book, um, Murder in the Bookshop is one of the only you might be able to find in a current reprint. And the Tapestry Room Murder is really fun because she dedicated it to President Hoover, with whom she was friendly, and calls it, because he loved detective novels, and so she dedicates it to him. She was also writing for all pulp magazines. You know, another thing that's really, I think, really interesting about her is that she's writing for a magazine like Thrilling Detective, and then she's also writing for the New Yorker. So she straddles all of these worlds, this sort of high end and the low end. And if somebody was willing to give her a paycheck, a byline, a contract, she would never say no. She was a very hard worker. She was the editor of the Best American Mystery Story series, the inaugural editor, 1931 and 1932, which I think is pretty neat because that series is still going today. She wrote an autobiography in 1937, I want to say. Yeah, 37. And I put the ad here because it says over 1 million readers have been primed for this book, which is true. I mean, she's published all of these mysteries, and you know, most of these mysteries, when she's publishing them, they're selling 10, 15,000 copies each. And she's very well liked in the libraries. She has a huge readership, and so much so that somebody would care about her autobiography, which is surprising. This review here is from the New York Times. Carolyn Wells hates autobiographies. And it's a really fun autobiography to read, not if you want to know dates or names or any kind of, real hard factual evidence of anything, but rather just to hear her fun stories. She's very much a storyteller in this autobiography, and it's non-linear and it's all over the place, um, but it's some fun to read. Another little facet, and I won't dwell too much on this, but another little facet of Carolyn's life was her collecting. So she always kind of thought of herself as a collector, and she had this book which she called The Sign of the Mermaid. Um, Later in life, it got bound into this big red leather binding with gilded, titles and all of that. But she would have all of her famous authors and artist friends either write something or draw a piece for her, and then it got bound into this book. And the pieces that you're seeing there at the bottom is the hand-drawn title page, and in the center there, that's a Gibson Girl by him, by Charles Dana Gibson, and just some writing by Theodore Roosevelt, with whom, of the four presidents that she knew, she was closest to Theodore Roosevelt and his family. And so that's just a piece of writing from him, signed from the White House in 1903. So this book has, just all of these literary and artistic lights from, the late 1890s into the 1930s, really. And this is something that she collected. And this is really the only thing that um, gets kind of left to the family as an heirloom. One of the things that when I was researching this book, I was like, well, maybe I'm going to find an archive somewhere. I'm not. Maybe I'm going to find an attic full of her things somewhere, family member, a basement, or something where I'm going to be able to read all of her letters or something like that. And of course, that didn't happen. But what did happen is I was able to reach her great niece, who's in her 90s. Um, just a lovely, lovely woman. And we connected, we became pen pals, and she is the current owner of this volume. And she let me come see her and come flip through it and take photos and hear some family stories. And that, to me, that was one of the best things that happened in the process of researching this book, was meeting her family and getting to see this very precious item, really the only item that gets left to the family after she dies in 1942. And we can talk a little bit more about that. And also on the collecting angle, she was really very interested in collecting Walt Whitman rare books. It's one of the things she did to kind of get over her husband's death, was become a pretty incredibly devoted book collector and focused a lot of her attention on Walt Whitman. And one of the interesting things about her is that when she dies, she leaves a very rare, wonderful collection of Walt Whitman to the Library of Congress, still there today. I had the pleasure of going there last year. I've been there a couple times, but going there last year, they put a little exhibit on of books that Carolyn Wells had given to them. And so she got feted, posthumously by the Library of Congress for this collection that she gave them, which was really lovely. These are just some books. I collect a little bit as well, and while I tried very hard not to make this this biography project a collecting project, I couldn't really help myself sometimes. So that shelf is actually right behind me here. I've collected some books that she owned, so books that have her book plate in them, like that Walden at the beginning, kind of reconstructing her library a little bit, and also some of her books, just that because they're beautiful to look at, because they have a really cool inscription that she's written to a friend. Um, I have one copy of a book that she inscribed to Mrs. Edison after they had lunch together one day in New Jersey, and Thomas Edison was there showing them how his new film technology worked. So just really kind of neat stories come out of some of these inscriptions in some of her books. So I hold back as much as I can, but I do I do collect a little bit. Here's that game I was talking about at the beginning. My husband bought me one of these on eBay pretty recently. I can't say I know how to play it because it is kind of complicated, but as you can see there, her name is, splashed right across the top, Carolyn Wells' Fascinating Mystery Game. I mean, this is 1939. She's kind of on the wane by then, and yet her name is being used to sell games. This is one of the last photos, maybe the last photo taken of her. It's 1937. It's in her apartment. She was being interviewed for a radio program, so they took her photo, and you can see in the backdrop her library, which I love because it's actually the only photo I've ever seen of her in her apartment, surrounded by her books. She's got some other collectibles in the foreground. She was a collector. She collected all kinds of stuff, silver objects, um, books, of course, pieces of art, furniture. Um, so always had that bug. And and that's it. I want to leave some time for questions. So I kind of raced through it a little bit, but I want to leave some time for questions. And I will stop sharing. So we'll go back to, there we go. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. Was wonderful. Does anyone, I have some questions, but does anyone else have some questions? We're a smallish group. We can speak up.
Did anybody know her name before now? I am curious.
I
I
did.
You did.
Um, yes, because I'm part of a online book club that
Mhm.
reads mysteries from the Golden Age.
Okay.
So I had heard of her.
Did you read a particular one of her books
I
or?
have not, but not yet. Murder in the Bookshop is on my list of books I want to read.
Yeah, like I said, that one's my favorite, but I think it's probably just the subject matter more than anything else.
Yes.
Vicky Van is another favorite that people talk about as being kind of a quintessential golden age mystery. It has a bit of a psychological element, which was unusual for Carolyn, and it's good.
I had heard of her through several anthologies of light verse.
Hmm.
Wasn't aware of the mystery.
Right? Isn't that amazing that she was doing all of that? I mean, how do you transition from being a humorist and a poet and all that, and then all of a sudden, well, now I'm going to write mysteries.
She did so much from what you said, and also I got the book because I loved it. I knew it was going to be hard with my background, my husband's background. Actually, I'm using his computer, but so many fields as you just mentioned, starting with puzzles and humor and children's and young adult literature and then anthologies and collecting and of course the mystery stuff. So it's just amazing. And I think, as you said, with her, I forgot that little book she did at age 6, being so precocious and so talented and hardworking. It's just amazing, and it's amazing that we don't know more about her. You touch about this in the book, and you touched a little bit about, but she didn't have a literary executor. She didn't have someone who was taking care of her materials. And I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about that because I thought that was so
Yeah.
fascinating, and the whole idea of the maid not knowing what to do with it or the family.
Yeah. So when she died, she had a living brother, and a niece whom she was pretty close to, um, but she left all of her copyrights and all of her stuff in her apartment, which includes all these rare books and jewelry and furniture, all this stuff. She leaves it all to her maid, um, a woman who had worked for her for 20 years and who had taken care of her. So it's not necessarily a surprise, although it does raise a lot of questions. And the thing about that is, while it was a wonderful gesture, this maid actually goes on. She's married, she's got children. They leave New York City, they go buy a house in Long Island, and they have a very nice life. And maybe Carolyn was doing that on purpose, but what they don't know is anything about publishing. So when Carolyn dies in 1942, she pretty much vanishes almost immediately. I mean, she actually has a book or two that are published posthumously because she was writing 3 or 4 mysteries a year at that point. So she's got them all set and ready to go. But she just falls off the map almost immediately because none of these books get reprinted. None of them are kept on the shelves, which I find pretty astounding because, right after World War II is when that paperback boom is happening. And, why her books weren't put into paperbacks with like garish covers to get them to sell, put them on the rack in the CVS. I mean, it's surprising that that didn't happen. And I think it didn't happen because the family, either they didn't care enough or just, had what they needed and didn't want to be involved or just didn't know how to go about doing that process. Um, and unfortunately, everything else got sold off in auctions. So there was a book auction, just specifically a book auction, and then an auction for all the other stuff, furniture and pianos and jewelry and furs and that kind of stuff. And the books are easier to track because very often she would put her book plate in them or the auction house would have a note saying, the provenance of that book. but everything else just kind of scattered to the winds. I mean, one of my initial questions in writing about her was, how does somebody who has this apartment full of amazing things, objects and books and whatever, how does it all vanish? Where does it all go? And, I thought, oh, maybe some family members have some of it, that was sort of part of my question at the beginning. And then to find that almost everything had just been scattered to the winds. Letters, packets of letters. The one auction that happens right after her death, there'll be an auction lot comes up, and it's 40 letters from Carolyn Wells to various authors. And my soul just kind of crushes in that moment, because I think, oh, the stuff we would have learned reading those letters, and what authors, who was she writing to? Who was she corresponding with? Those are things that, if an author has an estate who takes care of material or places it in a university library or an institutional library where scholars can go and read it later. But that didn't happen. So, there is no central archive of her stuff, and that's what happens. If you don't have those things in place, it's much easier to be forgotten about.
Yeah. It's just so fascinating the way you deal with that, and also deal with the many things that she was involved in, and the way you structured your book to deal. You briefly showed the slide and mentioned the film and how she got bigger credit in the
From the poster.
broadside or the promotion than the author. But I was just fascinated by I forgot what you called them, the little treatments that they made before they did the screenplay.
Yeah, scenarios, they
yeah.
called them.
But the way you wove all of that into her story is just fascinating. I was really excited and pleased with your choice of narration, and I didn't know if you would share your choice of deciding to write it in the first first person, because it's unusual in a biography, in a way. I mean, I think it's wonderful, but would you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I do like to say the book is, 80 or 85% biography and 10 or 15% memoir. But I think because it turned out that, because the story initiated with that book plate and with my story, my collecting journey, I kind of knew that I would be involved in some way when I started to do research about her. I also thought to myself, I'm going to write 300 pages about somebody that no one's heard of. I have to make it lively in some way. No one wants to read, or maybe some people do, but it's very hard to sell a book that, you're going to just plod along with somebody's life. And because she wrote so many books too, I knew there was going to have to be a lot of review material put in there. What do people think about her books? A lot of quoted material. And I thought, if I don't do something to liven up this narrative, it's just going to read like a bunch of quotes and a bunch of dates. And for somebody that you've never heard of, that's a hurdle. So I kind of thought it had to be a little lighter. I would not call it scholarly. I mean, I think I'm a pretty good scholar in that I'll dig for resources and I will, that kind of thing. But I didn't want it to come off as too scholarly a tone. I wanted it to be a lighter tone, and I also thought she might enjoy that. Frankly, she was very much like, books should be amusing, they should be entertaining, they should, that kind of thing. So I thought that might, in some way, respect her too. She hated biography, and she actually made statements like, I think biographers are terrible and they just want to make you look good all the time. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to try to be a little amusing. And I think I mentioned to you before, Ellen, that, I'd read this book called Lady from the Black Lagoon, which was a biography of a woman who was a Hollywood costumer, scenery maker, and she worked on The Creature from the Black Lagoon. And the woman who wrote her biography was very similar, a little bit of memoir tucked in there, just because, you're kind of doing this story where you're, especially with Carolyn, who is writing detective novels, the fun is in doing the research. The fun is in going to, I went to the Library of Congress, I went to Rahway, I went to a random man's house in Providence, Rhode Island, so I could see his book collection. He had a full collection of Carolyn Wells's material. And kind of go to all these different places in the book because I thought would be fun. It would be a little detective story of its own to kind of pick up this strand and pick up that one and bring the reader along. A friend of mine who read it said he felt like I had kind of taken him by the hand and we kind of went on this journey together. And I thought I love that, and that's exactly what I was hoping for.
Well, I think that's great. It is storytelling, and it is that you are a detective. Are a detective, but I also would say that you're a scholar, very much a scholar. Maybe not in the stuffy way that we think of it, but your book is full of scholarship and critical analysis and commentary. But I found your voice so engaging in this storytelling and personable that it drew me into the content, and you really helped navigate all of those different genres and the facets of Wells' life and her work. And also, I mean, as I said, I studied 19th century and early 20th century literature. Well, of course, we didn't talk about these less serious genres. And at the beginning of your book, I had to take notes because um, you say that Wells was a woman both too much and not enough, and that she was prolific in genres that were not taken seriously. But it just is a wonderful book, and I really highly recommend that people read it. And now that they've got a taste of it. Um, any other questions? I have, as I said, I have tons of them. I could keep Rebecca here all day. Anybody
There's
else have
some
a question?
questions in the chat, Ellen.
Oh, okay, thanks. I was watching Rebecca and not looking. Okay. Um, okay, sorry. So one of them I'm just seeing right now. How did the man, I believe he's in become a collector of Wells?
Yeah, he's a voracious collector, not just of Wells, but of many, many other detective novelists and also sci-fi, I think, fantasy. He has a barn a, outside of his house, an entire barn that is just his book collection. So probably 100,000 books. Um, the way he became involved with Wells is, I think, as a child. Um, so in the 1950s, he was looking for I think he told me spooky books was a phrase he used, and his mom brought him to the library, and they found a couple of Carolyn Wells's later mystery novels, which have kind of spooky titles and cover art, a skeleton hand or black cat or something like that. And he picked those up and loved them and just started trying to find everything that she had ever written. And that's the way he started with Carolyn.
Do you know, I mean, he's getting up in age. Do you know if does he have any plans for his collections, especially Wells, or
I don't know.
is there any place that has the whole collection? Not the Library of Congress?
Um, the Broadway Public Library has a pretty good collection of her books in
Okay,
their local history room. I don't know if it's complete, but I think they were aiming for that. So
right.
I think they will have that.
That's good.
Yeah.
Shelley asks if was Wells involved in the design of that game with
I don't know. I don't
yeah.
know anything about the game. The first time I saw that game, I was at the Broadway Public Library, and the man who had been helping me there, the town historian, had bought one for himself on eBay. And so he was showing it to me. That was the first time I ever saw it or heard anything about it. But I mean, during the 1930s, she was involved in all kinds of offshoots, like radio shows that had to do with mysteries. Um, so I think that, by then she had a name. She had established this name for herself, and people wanted to bank on that.
Mm.
So I don't know if she was actually involved in the design of it. Um, I found nothing in any of letters or resources about that game. Um, but that's not surprising either, again, because, doing the research on Carolyn means you see a couple of letters over here and a couple of letters over there, and maybe, Ohio University has got more than anyone else, and even that's not very much. They have a handful of manuscripts. Um, they have the booklet from when she was a child. They have a handmade book from when she was in her 20s and she went on like seashore vacation with some friends, and it's like a photo collage of her vacation. So even so, it's so piecemeal that if I found anything related to the game, it would just be like a needle in a haystack.
I love this slide when you talked about her autobiography about millions were primed for the book. And another thing that you put in your study is that she might not have been treated very well or considered very well by some of the anthologists, even in her time, and the critics, but she was read by millions, and librarians also collected her. So it's just amazing that she was vanished.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, just to kind of go back to that, I was saying at the beginning, the yellow gown thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, there's a novelist named John Dixon Carr, and you guys might be very familiar with his work. He was a real acolyte of Carolyn's, loved her books, kind of said he molded himself in her, you know, honor. And then when she died, he went and he bought the whole run of all of her books. And he was, at the time, he was living in England. And he came to America. He bought the whole run of her books. I actually wonder if he bought them at the auction after her death, but I'm not sure about that. Brings them back to England, rereads them, but decides they're no longer readable to him. And he writes an article, and it's published in the Ellery Queen's mystery magazine in the 60s. And he says, gosh, I want to see if I can find my quote exactly, but he talks about how these women, and he's not just talking about Wells, but he does very specifically talk about, oh, those novels, you know, the ones with like the frontispiece with the illustration with the woman in the yellow gown, and she's, you know, dead, or she's sighing, or this or that. And he very specifically mentions that, which seems odd to me. And I also wonder if he's including Agatha Christie in his comments, because he says, you know, some of these women are living and some are dead, but basically they've had their time. They're lost ladies now well lost. And he said it about Anna Catherine Green too. He included her in his little roundup. And, you know, to me, it's such a betrayal. It certainly could be that you read the books in the 20s and you loved them, and when you reread them in the 50s, you didn't love them so much. Of course, that happens to everyone, I think. I mean, you know, you could read a book in one element of your life and you love it, and read it 30 years later, you might not love it so much anymore for many reasons. But he chose to not only, you know, to not only just quietly not love the books anymore, but to bash her. You know, in the magazine that everyone in his world, in the mystery world, would be reading. And I think that was kind of the nail in the coffin. And you know, to me, it's such a betrayal that he does that. And the mostly male critics of the mid-century, you know, do similar things with her. Either they say things like, well, she was never really well liked, untrue, or they ignore her completely.
And you said Carr was probably talking about Christie as well as Anna Catherine
He
Green
may
and
have
other
been.
women.
Yeah.
But Christie's met similar fate in terms of, you know, she's good at puzzles, but not a good writer. And I saw that Sophie Hannah, who has continued the Poirot stories, actually dealt with that question in a post, you know, about, yeah, she
Hmm.
knew people. So it's just something that continues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Christy's been a little luckier in that she's got a wonderful estate
That's
that keeps her
it's
in
a
the
whole
spotlight
industry. It's a
even
whole
today.
industry at this
Yeah.
point. They keep
Yeah.
churning it out, but yes,
Hmm.
yes. Any other questions for Rebecca? I've posted in the chat where you can find her books, and also how you can find her on social media. And for more information or a copy of the slides that Rebecca's generously offered, you can email her. That's in the chat for you. We've already got a comment saying awesome, very awesome talk, and wonderful book. And we really appreciate you taking time to spend with us.
Thank you. My
Thank you.
pleasure.
Yeah. And I just want to remind people that we have one more program left for 2025. And I put that in the chat. It's Christmas with Donna Andrews. So we hope you can join us there. The registration link is there. And let's all give a round of applause again for Rebecca. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. People have,
Nice to meet you
the
all.
chats are saying, I don't know if you're watching the chat, but they're saying wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah,
You're
thank
getting
you.
some.
I
Yeah.
see a Carlton Wells there. No
Yes.
relation though.
Carl's a mystery writer too. So great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ellen, that was wonderful. Jenna, it went so smoothly. Nina, thank you so much. I see that the people that are left. That was great.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was a good talk. Yeah. Very
she's
She
interesting.
fantastic.
she was fascinating.
The book is just a pleasure to read. It's
Mm.
really a read. Great.
It reminds I have not read it yet, but
Yeah.
it the way that she was speaking and the way you directed your questions, it reminds me of Lucy Worsley's Agatha Christie book in a sense.
Mm.
So I'm thinking, oh, I think I'd enjoy this one. And
Yeah.
I'm on the same group as Jane. And I remember seeing the name when she said that, but I don't remember seeing
Yeah.
any of her books in my mom's house. And she always had a
Yeah.
ton. Now, mom was British, so she had most of the British authors, Christie or,
Yeah.
but yeah, that was fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I think as she said that once she died and didn't have a real literary executor,
Yeah.
nobody was pushing to reprint her books. Nobody took advantage of the paperback thing that started in the 40s, which would have perpetuated her work. So,
Such
and
a
Nina,
shame.
are you still there? I don't know if she's still here. I have
Yeah,
to.
she just unmuted.
Good. Well, Nina, I forgot to mention all of the things that you've done at running programs too, like being the host. So, as a program committee, so don't put
Oh,
don't put Mally and me ahead of you at all.
oh,
Team
no,
effort.
no,
Really.
you've done
Good.
so much. I didn't, I'm kind of driving and listening to the
Oh,
program.
okay.
That's why I didn't have anything to say or whatever, but
Oh.
I listened. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
You
Well,
did
we
an
don't want you
awesome
to
job with the
crash or anything.
questions.
So,
Oh,
thank you for coming.
You guys
Okay.
have put together a wonderful program, and I am so sorry I missed our writers group. We had something come up with work, and it was like, all right, I'm so sorry. Nina, I will still read. I want to see what's going on. I will go back and read and provide some feedback because although I hear Dinky wasn't in this story from what Ellen said. So for these
Dinky's not in
pages,
it, but boy, she has some interesting things come up in
she
that
always does.
chapter. Yeah. Really.
So I will definitely
Okay.
mark it on my calendar for Thursday. I'm trying to think. I don't believe I have any meetings or anything going on, so I should be able to do 4:30 Thursday.
Okay. Well,
All right, all.
That was great. Thank
all right.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And I'll send a
Bye.
thank you. I'll send a thank you to Rebecca.
Great.
Liz.
Perfect.
Okay.
Did Rodney answer you in
He
terms of
didn't answer
payment?
me, but I'll CC him and because I'll assure Rebecca that he'll be getting, so in my thank you and
Okay.
and repeat how to, to pay her because she wants it by
No
Venmo.
problem. And I'll follow up